Greetings, family. This is evoemetemp, otherwise known as the Rogue Black Girl, and I am returning for the reading of chapter number 9 of the wonderful book Communion, The Female Search for Love by Bell Hooks. So we're just going to get started. Going to get right to it. This chapter is entitled Sisterhood, Love, and Solidarity. Most women search for love, hoping to find recognition of our value. It may not be that we do not see ourselves as valuable. We simply do not trust our perceptions. Ooh. When I was a girl, I thought I had marvelous traits. I was perpetually surprised that so much that I believed was grand and delightful in myself was hateful and suspect in the eyes of my parents, especially my mother. Still, she was full of contradictions. One day my mother might mock my love of reading and threaten to take all the books away, and another day she might speak with pride about the same passions that had been previously mocked, used to shame and humiliate me. In her in her book Life and Death, Unapologetic Writings on the Continuing War Against Women, Andrea Dworkin describes her mother as telling her often, quote, that she loved me but did not like me. Oh my God. Women of all races and classes offer testimony of being told this by their mothers. Its impact was to make them feel as though something was deeply wrong about them. Describing her relationship with her mother, Dworkin recalls, quote, she experienced my inner life as a reproach. Oh my God. She thought I was arrogant and especially hated that I valued my own thoughts. When I kept what I was thinking to myself, she thought I was plotting against her. When I told her what I thought, she said I was defiant and some species of bad, evil, nasty, rotten. Oh my God. She often accused me of thinking I was smarter than she, end quote. Again and again, I hear testimony from gifted women about their mother's accusations of arrogance. My mother continually berated me for what she perceived to be my thinking, that I was smarter and better than she. Feminist scholarship has helped us to understand that the women who suppress their own unique gifts in the interest of being dutiful daughters, wives, and mothers are often filled with rage. Oh my God. Whereas it would seem logical that a woman who feels thwarted in her own development might be thrilled to see her daughter become actualized, all too often, her eroded self-esteem leads to mixed feelings of full-on expressions of competition and rage. At its worst, the mother-daughter warfare may actually lead parents to commit acts of soul murder, wherein they systematically try to destroy a daughter's self-esteem so that her gifts will never be realized. Oh my God. Patriarchal thinking normalizes competition between mothers and daughters, as well as the girl child's rebellion. Luckily, progressive feminist mothers who have either unlearned crippling low self-esteem or who were provident enough to be raised in families where their growth was nurtured are daily raising wonderful daughters without competing or devaluing them. Their experience stands as a direct challenge to any notion that jealousy and competition are naturally present in mother-daughter bonds. In the presence of this group of self-loving girls, our woman spirit is uplifted. Their personal power is intoxicating and awesome. They exude it like a strong and heady perfume, and it is easy to see how such girlhood power, were it widespread, could easily undermine the conventional sexist social order. One day, these girls will become women who publicly tell their stories. Their memoirs or their memories of supporting, affirming, consistently caring mothers will stand as a counter-narrative challenging and changing the old images of mother-daughter hatred and conflict. Ugly competition and conflict between mothers and daughters is not simply the outcome of sexist suppression of adult women's growth and self-actualization. Plenty of talented, successful, powerful women compete in unkind and cruel ways with their daughters. Oh my God. Horror stories abound about the relationships between famous mothers and their daughters. While much attention was focused on consensual sexual relationships between father and daughter in writer Catherine Harrison's memoir, The Kiss, the really shocking story the book chronicles is the intense, vicious rivalry between Harrison and her mother. And oranges are not the only fruit. Jeanette Winterson's working-class mother punished her for her passions for books. She worries that her mother will find the collection of books she has gathered, writing, "One day she did. She burned everything." Some folks would argue that they parent as their mothers parented them. Hence, sexist thinking continues to be a primary culprit. Importantly, this negative, competitive impulse which seeks the psychic annihilation and destruction of the other, the female who possesses what one lacks, often characterizes mother-daughter bonds as well as general female interaction. Competition between successful women and their daughters is often rooted in the adult woman's fears of aging in a patriarchal culture. No matter how talented and powerful a woman is, the rules of sexism continue to render her valueless as she ages. Hence, a gifted, successful, attractive woman may feel threatened by the reality that sexism ensures that her daughter, who may be less gifted and not at all successful or attractive, will still, quote, win by being more valued by the virtue of youth. When I was an insecure young woman, I did not think youthfulness was a resource. My shaky self-esteem made youth a burden. I wanted to grow older, for I was certain that with age would come clarity and confidence. Moving into midlife, I suddenly awakened one day to the reality of the power of a young woman's body in patriarchal culture. While I had known this intellectually, it was quite another matter to experience it deeply, viscerally. To be honest, it shocked me to realize I would never have access to this fresh, youthful energy again. And I'm convinced that older men desire younger women in part to siphon off this energy. Ooh, shit. To siphon off this energy, not to have to deal with the permanent loss of their own lives. Clearly, an aging woman with cripplingly low self-esteem easily feels such youthful energy to be an annihilation affront. And an insecure mother who has to witness the vibrancy of this emerging youthful womanness might see it solely as an attack on her identity and personhood. Intense hatred and cruelty in the mother-daughter bonds is described again and again in contemporary memoirs. While many readers were shocked by Catherine Harrison's revelation of chosen father-adult-daughter incest in her memoir, The Kiss, I found her intense hatred of her mother to be shocking. Tragically, the hatred and competition between them seemed to motivate her acquiescence as a young adult to her father's inappropriate sexual overtures. Describing her childhood, growing up in the same house as both her mother and maternal grandmother, Harrison confesses she learned to repress her true feelings, quote, a lesson reinforced often during a childhood of female warfare and tricky shifting alliances, end quote. Writing about her eating disorder, she further declares, quote, anorexia may begin as an attempt to make myself fit my mother's ideal, and then to erase myself. But its deeper, more insidious and lasting seduction is that of exiling her. Anorexia can be satisfied. My mother cannot. So I replace her with the disease, with a system of penances and renunciation that offers its own rewards, that makes mothers obsolete, end quote. While review after review of this book rhapsodized about the illicit romance between father and grown daughter, Harrison's monstrous hatred of her mother is perceived as, quote, normal. Writing retrospectively, Harrison suggests that her hatred of her mother is a justifiable response to maternal neglect and indifference. Yet her father had been absent, neglectful, and abusive, but he is never the object of her total rage, scorn, and contempt. Women find it easier to rage against one another. Anger directed at males feels more threatening, their power to retaliate more dangerous. Harrison's mother refuses to respond to her daughter's longing for consistent, caring recognition. Many of our mothers have behaved in this contradictory manner, but most of us do not retaliate against them with competitive rage and hatred. Feminist thinker Naomi Wolf, in her memoir Promiscuities, felt it was normal that she and her peers, quote, nursed an emerging sexual competition with our mothers, end quote. In her recent memoir, Black, White, and Jewish, Rebecca Walker chronicles her desperate longing to compete with the world of fame to capture the undivided attention of her writer mother. I went through a phase in my young adult life in which I longed to have a mother who was intellectually successful. My fantasy was that this mom could serve as a guide, showing me how to navigate my way through the turbulent waters of artistic development. If nothing else, I imagined we would talk together. This image of mother-daughter bonding was shattered for me as I began to meet the daughters of famous mothers. The grown daughter of a famous artist invited me to a showing of her new work and proceeded to tell me that she had been sent makeup in the mail by her mother and told not to come looking frumpy. She had also been told that she could bring a friend as long as we did not speak. A well-known thinker and writer, the daughter willingly acquiesced to the mother's demands, desiring both to please her and to avoid incurring her wrath. Way too many mothers I met were either dangerously competitive or studiously indifferent. Hungry for their mother's attention and approval, the daughters were often so emotionally fragile that they were incapable of making life-affirming decisions for themselves in work or relationships. Most shocking to me was the reality that many of these successful moms were advocates of feminism. Damn. While they could brilliantly critique male sexism, they remained blind to how sexist notions of womanhood informed the way they related to their daughters, or, for that matter, to other women. Their brutal treatment of their daughters did not end in childhood but continued even as the girls became mature, wounded women. Writing about female response to her success when feminist movement was going strong, Erica Young recalls, quote, I was shocked by the bitter criticism I received from some very smart women. The number of feminists who attack other women is shocking. It seems to me that if women are going to change the world, they first have to change themselves and rise above that competitiveness, which we have been taught and learned to be truly sisterly to each other. End quote. Even between females, envy between females has always been brutally divisive. What woman among us does not remember the very first time she heard the story of Snow White and Hansel and Gretel? How many of us were puzzled by the hatred these older, more powerful women harbored toward innocent girls? I remember wondering why there had to be a constant contest to see who was, quote, the fairest of them all. It was hard to pretend that Hansel and Gretel were starved. It was hard to comprehend that Hansel and Gretel were starved as their parents ate. And who could understand the fathers allowing the mean wife stepmother to cast them out? In a collection of essays written by women talking about the fairy tales that most affected us, Fern Kufer emphasizes the impact that stories of competing evil stepmothers had on her consciousness. Writing her memoirs in Trust, she recalls, it is the story of a child in the world without a mother, without resource or protection, that haunted me so in the fairy tales I read as a girl, of abused Cinderella, isolated Rapunzel, of motherless Snow White. These stories often serve as our girlhood indoctrination into the nature of relationships between women, between young girls and their female elders. Kufer writes about rethinking the role of the stepmother when she became one. Whenever she was uncertain of how best to care for her stepdaughters, Kufer would imagine how she would want a stepmother to treat her biological daughter if she were not in the picture. She let her answers to that question guide her. The contemporary film version of Snow White was so troubling because the stepmother, magnificently played by Sigourney Weaver, is very beautiful, yet her beauty is not enough. And in this film, the stepdaughter has already decided not to give her new parent a chance. This movie made their female hatred of one another mutual. Their acts of brutality, attempting to burn each other or bury each other alive, was so bizarre as to be painful to watch. In many narratives of competition between females, especially where there is an age difference, youth wins out, but affection between women is lost in the end. As everything goes up in flames, only the stench of envy remains. Before it was cool simply to announce one's feminism, women became feminists by undergoing a conversion process, usually through attending consciousness-raising groups. Contrary to popular myths that would have everyone believe that women in those groups did nothing but sit around bad-mouthing men, most of these groups began with women talking about how we saw ourselves and other women, how we acted. We openly confessed our fears and hatreds of other women. We talked about how to combat jealousy, the politics of envy, and so on. Part of the process of becoming a feminist was to critique and change our sexist ways of seeing one another. Sisterhood wasn't just about what we shared in common, things like periods, obsessive concerns about our looks, or bitching about men. It was about women learning how to care for one another and be in solidarity, not just when we have complaints or when we feel victimized. Lots of women can hang tight with one another and bond if one of them has a problem or if they share a problem. Affirming another woman's success is the difficult issue for many females. Woo! Oh, shit. Even those of us who claim to be feminists. From girlhood on, females learn how to use terroristic tactics of exclusion, ostracism, and shunning to police one another. Studies show that boys may fight with one another in competitive conflicts rooted in envy or jealousy, but rarely employ long-range terroristic tactics to, quote, ice one another. Girls compete often to the death, and by that I mean to symbolic murder of one another. All this essentially woman-hating behavior continues into adulthood. It is woman-hating because it is rooted in the same fairy tale logic that teaches us that only one female can win the day or be chosen. It is as though our knowledge that females lack value in the eyes of patriarchy means we can gain value only by competing with one another for recognition. At one time, it was believed that females did not know how to engage in healthy competition because we, unlike our male counterparts, did not learn the skill playing sports. Yet women who coach female competitive sports report that major difficulties arise when teammates disagree and that these interactions tend to be especially brutal. As a writer, I have found this to be equally the case, that when I am, or any woman is, perceived as getting more attention than her peers, she will be viscerally attacked, not the media. And if she writes a lot, then women who write less will put her down or publicly say her work is repetitive. This list goes on and on. Particularly, women seem unable to acknowledge or value an individual woman who is perceived as being exceptional. Often, other women will accuse her of being a fraud. Apparently, males are better socialized to accept that an individual man may have exceptional skills or talents. In the world of competitive sports, everyone will agree that Michael Jordan is an exceptional basketball player. Now, that does not mean that other gifted ball players will not strive to win against him. But when he scores more, they don't go around saying he is not really a good player. He's just lucky. The heart of female inability to affirm, quote, exceptional females is the threat of annihilation. On the one hand, women in patriarchal culture confront what I euphemistically call the Dixie Cup mentality. This is that form of sexist thinking that says females are all alike. Therefore, it does not matter which one you choose. Faced with this logic, some females feel that the way to compete is to identify flaws and lacks in other females. Since our unique distinctive traits may not be acknowledged by patriarchy, and most important by the men in our lives, fathers, brothers, and if we are heterosexual, lovers, then females may feel as though the only way to get special attention or to be chosen is by diminishing the value of their female peers. It is a lot easier to cut down or trash someone else and harder to cultivate one's own special attributes. When we, as females, cultivate our own attributes, we do the work of building the self-esteem that is the bedrock of self-love. While many books have been written on the subject, I remain a great fan of Nathaniel Braden's 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. He defines these 6 pillars as the practice of living consciously, of self-acceptance, of self-responsibility, of self-assertiveness, of living purposefully, and of personal integrity. Of these, self-acceptance is particularly hard for females. Braden defines self-acceptance as the refusal to be in an adversarial relationship to myself. Early on in girlhood, most females learn to feel that we are flawed in some way and that must be corrected. Whatever the ground for this notion, it is definitely continually reinforced by sexism. This thinking automatically places us in an adversarial position with ourselves. Progressive therapy can help individuals move towards self-acceptance because it teaches us how to cease being our own worst enemy. Braden's use of the word refusal is crucial. Women need to claim our power to say no to all that negates our value. By affirming and self-accepting happens Being affirming and self-acceptance happens easily if we consciously practice refusing to embrace negative accounts of ourselves and our reality. One of the reasons many more women begin to be self-loving in midlife rather than at earlier ages of our growth is that it is a time when we feel free to please others. The women interviewed in Beth Batenovich's collection, What We Know So Far, all testify that self-acceptance is easier. Billie Jean King enjoys the fact that in midlife, quote, finally we can do anything we want, and that equates to freedom, end quote. Elizabeth Watson urges women in midlife to speak out, quote, stand up for what you believe. Go back to the teenage person you were who wanted something very badly, then go out and get it. This is a time in your life when there's nothing and no one standing in your way, end quote. After years of pleasing others or being self-effacing, women in midlife often begin to do the work of self-critique, an evaluation that might have been more difficult or threatening at a younger age. We know in midlife that time is running out, that we will not have endless chances to start over. In Jane Jervis's story of how she set out on her path to becoming a college president in midlife, she acknowledged that choosing to value her needs led to the end of her first marriage. Women in long-time marriages whose husbands abandoned them in midlife, often to choose a younger partner, frequently come face to face with the reality that they do not have an autonomous identity. Midlife marks the moment of their self-creation. My best friend from my first year in college, divorced after more than 20 years of marriage, has raised 4 wonderful children and is now doing the work of reclaiming the identity she established long ago, but then surrendered in patriarchal marriage. Finding herself is a heady, thrilling experience. She has never been so free, and it's both exhilarating and frightening. Like many of us, she is coming to self-love late, but her journey has been full and rich. Self-love is always risky for women within patriarchy. Females are rewarded more when we experience ourselves and act as though we are flawed, insecure, or especially dependent and needy. A woman who does not learn how first to fulfill her psychological needs for acceptance will always operate from the space of lack. This psychic state will make her vulnerable and will often lead her into unhealthy relationships. Although it is risky, when we are self-loving, our growing contentment and personal power sustains us. Contentment and personal power sustains us when we are rejected or punished for refusing to follow conventional sexist rules. Usually, self-help books and therapy encourage us to believe that acts of self-love will make life better and happier. So it is especially confusing to women when we choose to be self-loving only to find ourselves resented. In my sweetest period of self-recovery, when I felt I was finally embracing myself wholeheartedly, I was initially thrown off balance by the lack of positive response to these changes. It was as though people in my life liked me better when I was in crisis, not eating properly, or depressed. In graduate school, I was always awed in the presence of successful, beautiful, older women who seemed to have everything. Then I would later hear about their alcoholism or other self-destructive habits. Knowing that these women had serious problems mediated their power in the eyes of many of their peers. It made the hatred of their power less intense. Often they were the objects of pity. Had they been healthy, had they been perceived as really having it all, they would assuredly have been the objects of vicious envy and cruel attacks. More men were attracted to me and to other women I knew when we were untogether. This is because it's easier to subordinate someone who does not feel good about herself or her life, or someone who may feel constantly insecure and afraid. Women readily testify that they stay in unhappy relationships because they fear no one else will want them. Instinctively, they know that the more able a woman is to assert agency on behalf of her well-being, the less desirable she may be in a patriarchal culture. While fewer men may, quote, want women who are healthy and self-loving, bonds with these men who do are more affirming, constant, and fulfilling. Concurrently, many women find themselves rejected by female pals when they make changes that differ from shared patterns of behavior that once bonded them together. Women often bond by sharing secrets and common experiences, lying about anything that would reveal differences in perspectives or desires. And it is often betrayal that breaks those bonds. Before women can create abiding love with one another, we must learn to be truth tellers, to break with the sexist notion that a good woman never tells what she really thinks. Many a friendship between women has ended because one person failed to speak her truths directly to her friend, choosing instead to inform her of her feelings through petty gossip and slander. In Harriet Lerner's useful work, The Dance of Deception, she explains, quote, "The struggle toward truth-telling is at the center of our deepest longing for intimacy with others. Truth-telling cannot coexist with inequality. There is never a resting place in the struggle for personal and political integrity. We can live today according to the values that we wish would govern the world in the hypothetical future we are working for. To honor diversity, complexity, inclusiveness, and connection in our lives now is to widen the path of truth-telling for everyone." End quote. Personal integrity is the foundation of self-love. Women who are honest with themselves and others do not fear being vulnerable. We do not fear that another woman can unmask or expose us. We need not fear annihilation, for we know no one can destroy our integrity as women who love. No woman who chooses to be self-loving ever regrets her choice. Self-love brings her greater power and freedom. It improves her relationships with everyone around her, but most especially it allows her to live in a community with other women, to stand in solidarity and in sisterhood. Marilyn Fry shares this useful insight in her book of collected writings, Willful Virgin. Quote, "To make a difference, women have to do impossible things and think impossible thoughts. And that is only done in community. Without a community of sense, an individual cannot keep hold of her radical insights. She becomes confused. She forgets what she knew. We call each other to creative acts of courage, imagination, and memory, but they are literally impossible without a community of women which recognizes and authorizes women's initiatives." End quote. While the self-loving woman may encounter more conflict, she has the skill to handle difficulties that come her way. That skill is grounded in self-acceptance, integrity, and a willingness always to do what is best for her own well-being. Coupled with those skills, she has the strength to stand in community with women, to enter a circle of love. Recently, my best friend from my undergraduate years visited me with her daughters. In their presence, we celebrated more than 30 years of friendship, telling them all we did to nurture our bond. We shared our willingness to give each other the benefit of the doubt in difficult moments, like the time she wrongly imagined I was seducing her boyfriend, or the time I was upset because she had not explained race or racism to her children. This oversight from a white woman whose best friend is black. We shared our ongoing commitment to being honest with each other, to forgiving, to nurturing our personal growth. We count ourselves lucky that our love abides, that it has stood the test of time and different choices. April remembers my telling her when I was 18 that I had no intentions of marrying, that I needed to be independent. A free woman. And she recalls feeling the same longing, but somehow suppressing it and letting the culture pull her into marriage when she had not yet fully claimed herself. We can speak of our differences, sharing the little envy we may feel about each other's lives. Yes, I envy her having such wonderful daughters. And yet that envy need not turn into negative jealousy, for she lets me share in her bounty. At this moment of union, we toasted female friendship, love, and solidarity, and hope for her girls that they, too, will find a circle of love in which to dance, a body of women whose arms will always hold and embrace them. We wanted to share our wisdom so that they will come to self-love sooner than we did, so that they will love other women rightly. In the church I attended while growing up, one of my favorite songs posed the question, quote, "Is it well with your soul? Are you free and made whole?" End quote. When we are self-loving, we attend to the deeper needs of our soul. We no longer fear abandonment or loss of recognition. We see ourselves clearly as we really are. And that clarity is the source of our strength and peace of mind. It is the space of mindful awareness where we can search for love together, communing and celebrating, cherishing the sweetness of sustained female solidarity. That's the end of chapter 9. I'm debating about whether I should continue with chapter 10. Let's see. Actually, I have work to do, so I may stop. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there. So that was a really powerful chapter, really moving chapter. I'm probably going to have to go back and take notes out. You can see I'm reading from outside, but I may share tomorrow, but I'm having an experience right now that chapter just really resonated with me, and it was actually quite timely. In the chapter before, I think I will talk about that a little. The chapter before, where she talked about this cultural confusion between caring and nurturing, caregiving and nurturing being confused sometimes with love, right? That there is this assumption that if we're the primary caretakers, which predominantly women are, because we're conditioned or acculturated to caregiving and nurturing, it's assumed that we know how to love, that we know how to give love, we know how to receive love, and we know how to love better than men. And that chapter really struck me because the women in my family, and I had always just assumed that it was the trauma that the women in my family had experienced over generations that it made it difficult for them to display love, right? To give love, right? So even in my own marriage, I remember telling my ex-husband said something to me to the effect of, and I was offended. Ooh, I was so in my feelings about it. He said something to the effect of, Iapo, you don't talk to me the way that you used to. You don't talk sweet to me anymore. You don't, you don't look me in the eyes anymore. You don't, whatever. And my response to him was, there was a lot going on, just to be fair. But my response to him was, you say I love you 100 times a day, but there's nothing in your behavior that displays love, displays that you care. And on the contrary, I might not tell you I love you 100 times a day, but I display love every day. And in my mind, the display of love was the task that I was doing on a daily basis, the caregiving and the nurturing of my child, of his children, and of him, that had me wore out and resentful because he did not contribute to those things. And so that was heavy for me. And then to read about this idea that caregiving and nurturing doesn't necessarily translate to knowing how to give love, because that was the mystery to me, man, was my relationship with my mother, my relationship to my daughter, my mother's relationship and all of her sisters to their mother, my memory of their mother, my grandmother, right? I was just telling my homeboy yesterday about how Bit Mama, Bit Papa was the fun guy, the go-to guy. He took us swimming in the creek, he barbecued. He was always smiling and happy and fun. And Bit Mama was not happy. And so we took that for granted as kids. Bit Mama was mean, right? Bit Mama was mean. So for whatever reason, I'm having these disconnections in my internet. Sorry about that if this is coming through weird. But the problem with that and reading this book now is that we're never taught as women what love is, what it is to receive love, how it is we're supposed to give love. And we assume that, and there is a level of love that is attached to caregiving and nurturing. But I think the thing that was important about the chapter that we read before was when she talked about the fact that even in a ton of single parent households where the mother is the primary caregiver, meaning she makes sure there's a place to live, she makes sure you have clothes, and she makes sure you can eat, those women can still, a number of statistics that support that women can be abusers and are abusers, whether verbal and psychological abusers or whether physical abusers. And we never talk about that, right? I was abused in childhood and by 4 different people. And the first 3 abusive scenarios that I was in were women that abused me as a child. And so it's easier to focus on the abuse levied by men, but it's something that I think as women we become ashamed to talk about when women abuse. And somehow it lessens the significance of what women contribute to households and raising children. But I don't think that's what she was harping on. I think what she was really trying to extract was this notion that we automatically as women know how to love, know how to give love, and know how to receive love. And that is an improper assumption in a society that does not teach us those things. And then the other thing, especially with this chapter, I used to call it, before I studied, just kind of like politically trying to understand what the hell was happening with me and my daughter. I used to call it the battle of the estrogen. I just used to chalk it up to this biological response that every woman should expect if she's raising a girl child, that as soon as that child reaches puberty, she was going to buck the system, and especially buck her mother. And that in households where the man may be present, his lot would be easy, but the mother's lot would be tragic, right? And so I just always assumed it was this biological expectation that we should have if we were women raising girl children. And so this chapter to me was so potent, man. It was so deep, because I have experienced that even in adulthood. I have experienced this, the dread that you feel as a teenager when you're in trouble and your mother says, we need to talk, right? Your stomach drops, you get all nervous and shit. You trying to think back about what you did and if she found out. You know what I'm saying? I'm 45 years old and I still have that experience when my mother calls me. That dread when she calls me or when she wants to, quote, talk to me. And this way that I am thrust back into childhood insecurity when trying to have a relationship with my mother as an adult woman, and it not be a relationship that is about power dynamics. And the part where she talked about, your the older parent, or the elder women because of their own insecurities, always accusing younger women of, quote, being arrogant or thinking that they are smarter than they are. So even to initiate a conversation about growth and development and evolution in their mind is an affront or an assault on, quote, how I was raised or what I believe, or that ain't how I grew up. Right. So this is, something that I'm experiencing as I'm dealing with, 4 generations of women. My mother is a great grandmother. I'm a grandmother and her daughter. I have my daughter. I have my granddaughter, and these dynamics, and how do we move forward? How do we evolve from, the ideas, primarily sexist and patriarchal ideas that we've internalized as women, and move forward in a way that our children are not afflicted with the same insecurities and baggage that comes with that thinking. And I was telling my daughter today, I was like, we have to do better. We don't have a choice. That we have too much information. It's not an offense or a way to condemn or demote our parents. They did not have the same access to information that we have. But once we know better, we have to do better. We can't just say, that's how I raised y'all, or that's how I was raised. And so that's supposed to shut down any struggle for us to evolve as people, as humans. That if we know better, if we have all the research that talks about what it takes to parent whole humans, right? What it means, to allow them to have to test healthy boundaries without popping them every time they do something minor, or popping them on the leg, or threatening to pop them, or telling them to shut up, or telling them to hush every time. It's not about power. It is about knowing that this little person that you have access to now will become an adult. And what is it that you are going to contribute to them being a whole human, even if it was something that you were not afforded as a child, developing into an adult. So yeah, the chapter is powerful. I'm going to have to go back over it because I was outside and I didn't have my pen out here taking notes like I usually am. But I hope that the reading was useful. It was helpful for me. And I go back over these a lot because as I get more, I get just as much from reading it as I do going back and like listening and, hearing things that I may have missed while I was reading. But this book is powerful. It's not to say that everything in here so far I've just wholeheartedly agreed like I'm reading biblical scripture or something, but I am saying it's just offered some insight that I have not had access to. And I'll admit that a lot of that, I admitted it when I first started reading the book, was the fact that I had not pursued it and it was not offered. And I'm talking about pursuing Black feminist thought and ideology when having cut my teeth in political life and Black power organizations. Like, these were never suggested readings. Bell Hooks and Octavia Butler and Toni Morrison was not stereotypical suggested reading within the context of Black power organizations. It just wasn't. It was male revolutionary Black thought that you were conditioned to, and it just gave you this one-sided view of the contradictions that come as a consequence of being colonized people, that somehow as if the only colonized people, and it's a line, man, it's a line that exists, that once we destroy, white power, once we win power, quote, collectively, that all the issues that exist among colonized people, primarily those contradictions that present themselves as patriarchal contradictions or sexist contradictions, will just wither away into the ethos, as if those contradictions did not exist before we met white folks. And I just don't accept it. I reject it, as a matter of fact. And that women have to be able, the organization that I was in, it's an attractive line. One, I think it's, it might be point number 14 of the platform was, it was a long point, but the gist of it was, one of the quotes from it was, you know, we are opposed to the special oppression of African women, and we believe that African women are the equal makers and shapers of human history. That's some powerful shit. But baby, patriarchy, misogyny is real, and it was never more pronounced as when I was in Black Power organization. And that's real life. Anybody can call me whatever you want to, you understand? But at the end of the day, without facing it head on and facing the peculiar nature of oppression of women of color in general and Black women in particular, we will never make any great leaps forward as a people, as a group, as humanity. We will not. Men continue to center their ambitions and their needs in the context of the whole movement, while women and children continue to suffer, even within the context of the movement. Motherfuckers in the movement abusing women. You got a conscious wife, you got a comrade wife, you got a comrade husband, and he's still beating her ass behind closed doors, even as they going into meetings and going to demonstrations and shit. And I've seen it in real life. So this book is just powerful, and I think that has been one of the failures of the Black Power movement in general, Black militant organizations, is the failure to study Black feminist thought of the last 50 years, 60 years now, that has over and over and over again, but we didn't know, I know, raised the peculiar struggles of African women attempting to liberate their people within the context of doing this work, and all of the issues that came as a consequence. So that's really all I got to say about that. For those of you who are tuning in late or want to know what I'm talking about, I just read chapter number 9 of the book Communion, The Female Search for Love by Bell Hooks. So tomorrow I'll be reading chapter 10, which is entitled Our Right to Love. That being said, this is Yapo Moyendekreations, otherwise known as the Rogue Black Girl, and I will see you again tomorrow at 5 Pacific Standard.